He traced the faint, silvery lines on her skin, marks a pregnant woman should never carry. In that moment, the cartel leader saw not his maid, but a ledger of sins. His world of calculated violence shifted. The man who negotiated in corpses now faced a silent testimony of abuse, and the monster within him snapped. Someone was going to pay, but the rules of his brutal kingdom were about to shatter. This is Javier Rojas, a man who built an empire on fear, and Rosa, the pregnant maid he never truly saw until now. Her scars tell a story her silence cannot. In a world where violence is currency, her suffering presents a debt no one calculated. But when a man known for brutality is confronted with a cruelty even he cannot stomach, which path does the monster take? The answer would break every rule of his bloody kingdom. To understand the fracture, you must first understand the machine. Javier Rojas didn't rise to control the Sinaloa corridor by being impulsive. His power was built on a cold, transactional logic. Loyalty was bought, disloyalty was punished, and every person had a clear monetary value. His mansion in Culiacan was a fortress of this logic, all marble and surveillance, where even the air felt priced. And then there was Rosa. She existed in the silent margins of that fortress. For 17 months, she was a ghost in his house. She arrived at 4 a.m., left by 8 p.m., and in between she made floors shine and sheets crisp without ever making a sound. Javier knew her only as the new one, a line item on the household payroll managed by his chief of security. She was 24, from a village in Guerrero where the cartels and the poverty had long since gutted any hope. The job, secured through a distant cousin who worked in Javier's garage, was a lifeline. It paid 3 times what she could earn in a month back home. The unspoken contract was simple: see nothing, hear nothing, be nothing. Her silence, however, was a cage. The father of her unborn child was not a loving partner, but her former employer in Monterrey, a wealthy businessman named Esteban Ruiz. When Rosa told him she was pregnant, his kindness vanished. He accused her of trapping him, of being a gold digger from the slums. The first slap was a shock. The 5th was routine. The worst were the burns, deliberate and precise from a cigar, meant to mark without showing in public. They left the silvery, branching scars across her lower back and ribs. She fled north to Culiacan with little more than the address of her cousin and the growing life inside her, believing the sheer, imposing terror of Javier Rojas's world would be a safer refuge than the intimate cruelty of Esteban. For months the system worked. Javier ruled his empire, Rosa cleaned its physical shell, and their worlds orbited without touching. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, a day of mundane logistics. Javier was preparing for a major shipment move. Tension in the house was high. He'd just finished a call where he'd ordered the disappearance of a rival's lieutenant, his voice as calm as a man ordering dinner. Needing a moment, he walked out onto the second-floor terrace overlooking the interior courtyard. Below Rosa was hanging laundry. The mid-morning sun was brutal. Wiping sweat from her brow, she lifted her arms to pin a white sheet, and her loose blouse rode up. Javier, glancing down, saw it. Not just one scar, but a constellation of them, etched across the taut curve of her pregnant belly and flank. In his world, scars told stories, knife fights, bullet grazes, badges of a violent trade. These were different. They were deliberate, intimate, the kind of markings made by someone who owned their victim in private. A strange quiet fell over him. The phone in his hand, still warm from ordering a murder, felt suddenly foreign. He watched as she gently patted her stomach, a whisper of a smile on her face for the child, a stark contrast to the map of pain on her skin. The cognitive dissonance was absolute. Here was a woman carrying new life, marked by old hatred. In Javier's brutal code, violence had purpose: to gain territory, enforce respect, eliminate threats. This violence served no purpose. It was pure consumption, the strong feeding on the weak for no gain. It was, to his mind, inefficient, and waste was the one sin his pragmatic brutality could not abide. He didn't snap with rage. He snapped into a chilling, hyper-focused clarity. He summoned his security chief, Miguel. The maid, Rosa, bring her file, everything. Miguel, a man who had seen Javier dismember traitors without blinking, felt a new kind of fear at the calm in his boss's voice. This is where the ledger of Javier Rojas's life presented a contradictory math. He was a man who had ordered the deaths of police officers, politicians, and innocent bystanders caught in crossfire. Yet, stories persisted within his organization, never spoken above a whisper of his peculiar, unshakable rules. He had once executed a lieutenant for beating his own mother. He forbade the trafficking of women and children in his territory, not out of morality, but because he considered it chaotic and bad for business. His violence was a tool, not a pastime. Rosa's scars represented a breach of a fundamental, if warped, order. The file was thin. Rosa Mendoza, from Guerrero, emergency contact, a cousin in the garage, previous employer in Monterrey, Esteban Ruiz, import-export business. Javier's eyes lingered on the name. He ran a finger over the photograph of Esteban, a smiling, polished man in a suit at a charity gala. The disconnect between that image and the scars on his maid's skin ignited something cold and methodical. He had Rosa brought to his study, a room few staff ever entered. She stood before his desk, eyes fixed on the floor, hands trembling over her swollen abdomen. She was waiting to be fired or worse. Javier spoke, his voice low. "Look at me." She did, and he saw not fear of a cartel boss, but the deep, exhausted terror of a woman who has been hunted. "Who did this to you?" She said nothing, a survival instinct stronger than his command. "The man in Monterrey, Esteban." It wasn't a question. Her flinch was all the confirmation he needed. He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "You will stay here, in the house. You will not leave until I say." He turned, his expression unreadable. "You are under my protection now. The question is, what does that protection cost?" For Rosa, the words were not a comfort, but a deeper trap. The devil she didn't know had just claimed ownership from the devil she did. And for Javier, the equation was set. A debt existed. Esteban Ruiz had taken something, dignity, safety, peace, that belonged to someone under Javier's roof, in the economy of violence that demanded repayment with interest. But this wasn't a rival or a snitch. This was a civilian in a suit in another city, protected by layers of legitimate society. To move against him would break Javier's own carefully crafted rules. Draw no unnecessary attention, never mix business with personal sentiment. Miguel voiced the danger hours later. "Jefe, this man, he is connected. He plays golf with the state prosecutor. His business is clean on paper. If we touch him, it will be a tsunami of heat." For a maid, Javier's response was silence. Then he picked up a glass paperweight from his desk, a heavy, crystalline sphere. He held it up, watching the light refract. "You see this? It is a system, every piece in its place, under pressure, predictable." He opened his hand and let the paperweight drop. It hit the marble floor with a deafening crack, shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. He looked at Miguel. He broke the system first. The order was given not as a roar, but as a series of quiet, precise instructions. Surveillance on Esteban Ruiz was to begin immediately. His routines, his weaknesses, his fears, every detail. Javier was not planning a simple murder. He was designing a lesson. But as his network stirred into motion, a single, unavoidable question began to leak into the foundation of his empire, a question that would unravel everything. What happens when a monster appoints himself the judge of other monsters? The first crack had already formed, and it was widening directly beneath Javier Rojas's feet. The surveillance on Esteban Ruiz began with the quiet efficiency of a predator staking new territory. Within 72 hours, Javier's network delivered a dossier that transformed a personal vendetta into a geopolitical puzzle. Esteban Ruiz was indeed a monster, but he was a monster with a permit. His import-export business was a front, a sophisticated laundering operation for none other than the Nueva Generación Cartel, Javier's most aggressive rival in the Pacific corridor. The golf games with the state prosecutor weren't just social. They were a delivery system for bribes, ensuring a protective veil over his, and by extension, the rival cartel's, operations in the state. Javier sat in his study, the report illuminated by a single desk lamp. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. The man who had marked Rosa was not some isolated devil. He was a key financial node for the enemy. Rosa's abuse was now reframed, not as a personal tragedy, but as an indirect attack on Javier's own sovereignty. In his world, everything was territory, and this man had treated someone now under Javier's roof as disposable territory. The emotional impulse curdled into a cold, strategic fury. Meanwhile, Rosa's gilded cage became a prison of unbearable tension. She was moved from the staff quarters to a locked guest suite within the main house. A doctor, paid for by Javier and sworn to secrecy, visited weekly to check on her pregnancy. The food was better than she'd ever eaten, but every meal felt like a test. Her cousin in the garage was given a month's salary and told to leave the state for his own safety, severing her last tether to the world. She was utterly alone, trapped between the memory of Esteban's hands and the terrifying, inscrutable will of Javier Rojas. She began to hear whispers among the remaining staff, rumors that the boss had gone *loco*, that he was risking everything for a muchacha *. She felt not like a person, but like a lit fuse attached to a bomb. Javier's inner circle was fracturing. Miguel, his chief of security, confronted him in the underground garage. "Jefe, with respect, this is a trap. They want you to come for him. It's a provocation. He flaunts this girl's suffering because he knows you will hear of it. He is bait and you are taking the hook." Javier, cleaning a handgun with methodical focus, didn't look up. "Then we cut the line, Miguel, and we take the fisherman's hand with it." The plan that formed was not an assassination. It was a statement. Javier wanted Esteban to understand the totality of his loss, to feel the dismantling of his world before the end. It was to be a three-act play of ruin. First, his wealth. Second, his reputation. Third, his life. And it would be done in a way that sent a clear message to the Nueva Generación: your tools are my playthings. The first act was financial annihilation. Using the intelligence gathered, Javier's hackers initiated a digital siege. They didn't just steal money, they weaponized Esteban's own legitimacy. Falsified transactions were injected into his company's records, showing massive, unexplained payments to known terrorist organizations. Whistleblower packets, complete with fabricated but credible evidence, were sent to the Mexican Financial Intelligence Unit and the American DEA. They triggered audits, froze assets, and lit a regulatory fire that even his paid-off prosecutor couldn't extinguish. Within a week, Esteban's clean business was a glowing beacon for every law enforcement agency on the continent. This is where the story pivots from a crime of passion to a cascade of unintended consequences. The heat Javier intentionally drew toward Esteban did not isolate him. It illuminated the entire network. The American DEA, long building a case against Nueva Generación, saw Esteban's implosion not as an accident, but as an opportunity. They turned the financial chaos into a wedge, offering Esteban a deal, witness protection, and a new life in exchange for everything he knew about the cartel's structure. Facing financial ruin and lifetime imprisonment, Esteban, the coward, began to talk. In Culiacan, Javier received the news from a deeply placed contact in the federal police. Esteban was in custody, singing like a bird. The protective rage that had fueled Javier now mutated into a cold, survivalist dread. He had, in his quest for a twisted justice, accidentally activated his rival's greatest vulnerability, and that vulnerability was now in the hands of the Americans. The Nueva Generación leadership would know they'd been compromised. And they would know Javier Rojas had lit the match. The cartel world operates on a simple rule: you never bring the eyes of the American government onto your brother, even your enemy brother, because those eyes never blink and never leave. Javier had broken the covenant. He was no longer just a man seeking vengeance, he was a liability. Rosa, sensing the tectonic shift in the house's atmosphere, made a desperate choice. One evening, using a hairpin to pick the lock of her suite, a skill born of a childhood in poverty, she slipped out into the hall. She wasn't trying to escape. The compound was a labyrinth of armed guards. She was looking for Javier. She found him on the terrace, staring at the city lights. He didn't turn as she approached. "Señor," she whispered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please, let me go. I will disappear. This war you are making, it is for you, not for me. I am just the excuse." Javier finally looked at her, and she saw not a protector, but a cornered animal calculating its next move. "It is too late for that," he said. "You are not the excuse, you are the proof. Your scars are the proof that their man was weak, that their whole system is built on weak, cruel men. And now they know I have that proof." He saw the confusion and terror on her face. "If you leave, they will find you. They will take my proof and destroy it. You stay, you have the baby here. It is the only place in this world that is safe for you now." But safety was an illusion. The retaliation from Nueva Generación was swift and surgical. They didn't attack Javier's drug shipments or his gunmen. They targeted his legitimacy, the delicate web of political and social connections that allowed him to operate in plain sight. A beloved, reform-minded journalist in Guadalajara, secretly on Javier's payroll for positive coverage, was found dead with a signature Nueva Generación calling card, a yellow rose in his mouth. The message was clear: we will expose your alliances and kill them, burning your bridge to the civilized world. Then the masterstroke. Using the information Esteban had given the DEA, which had been strategically leaked back to them through corrupted channels, they identified the location of Javier's 7-year-old son from a previous relationship, living secretly with his mother in Spain. A photo arrived on Javier's encrypted phone, his son playing in a park in Madrid, taken from a car window the previous day. No threat was written, none was needed. The fortress of Javier Rojas was crumbling from the inside out. His code, the very logic that had compelled him to act, was being used to break him. He had sought to balance a moral ledger and in doing so had ignited a conflict that threatened to consume everything he had, including the very woman and unborn child he had, in his own way, sought to avenge. The monster had appointed himself judge, and now the entire courtroom was on fire. As Javier stood over a map of the city, plotting a counter-strike he knew might be his last, a single, horrifying thought crystallized. In trying to save one life from a cruel man, he had placed that life at the center of a war zone. The path of the monster had led him not to redemption, but to a cliff's edge, with Rosa and her child tied to his back, and the only way forward was to jump. The leap was not a charge into battle, but a retreat into a deeper, more terrifying shadow. Javier Rojas made a decision that broke the final rule of his own playbook. He went to the police, not the local, corrupted municipal police, but to a specific, decorated commander in the federal ministerial police known for being stubbornly, inconveniently clean. Commander Anya had spent a decade trying to pin something on Javier and had only a file of dead ends to show for it. The meeting took place at dawn in a nondescript safe house. Javier arrived alone, a profound breach of protocol that shocked his own men. He laid out not his own crimes, but a gift-wrapped case against the Nueva Generación Cartel, Esteban Ruiz's financial records, the location of 2 key cocaine processing labs, the names of 3 paid-off judges. His price was not immunity, but a specific, immediate action, a military-grade extraction and protective custody for Rosa Mendoza, and upon her imminent birth, her child. He presented it as a strategic trade. He was giving them a bigger fish to fry, and in return, they would remove a piece from the board that his enemies were using to distract him. Commander Anya listened, his face a mask of stone. He understood the calculus. This was the break of a career. He also knew it was poison. And what, Anya asked, stops me from taking this information and arresting you the moment the woman is secure? Javier's smile was thin and cold. Because the information I have given you is the first page of a manuscript. The rest is with my lawyers, to be released to the media and every rival cartel should anything happen to me or my interests. You will get your victory, Commander, but you will do it my way, on my timeline. The deal was struck in that gray hour. It was the moment Javier Rojas, the untouchable kingpin, publicly acknowledged a vulnerability. And in his world, a visible weakness is a bleeding wound in shark-infested waters. The news traveled through the underworld faster than any police radio. Javier Rojas had collaborated. He had used the state as a weapon against a rival. This was the ultimate blasphemy. The fallout was immediate and volcanic. The fragile, violent peace between cartel factions in the region shattered. Nueva Generación, now under direct federal assault thanks to Javier's intelligence, declared total war. They were no longer just targeting Javier's operations. They issued a Levanton order, a blanket authorization to kidnap or kill any of Javier's known associates, family members, or even distant employees. The city of Culiacan, already tense, became a kaleidoscope of terror. Gun battles erupted in plazas in broad daylight. The bodies of Javier's mid-level operators began appearing along highways with signs, "For the traitor." Inside the mansion, the siege mentality reached its peak. Miguel, the security chief, was now guarding a boss he believed had lost his mind. The staff, save for a skeleton crew, had fled or been sent away. Rosa, heavy with child and paralyzed by a fear so profound it felt like a physical weight, listened to the distant pops of gunfire and the frantic voices on Miguel's radio. The doctor delivered her baby in a fortified room on the second floor, with Javier standing guard outside the door like a statue. It was a boy. She named him Mateo, a name that meant gift of God, a quiet prayer in a godless place. This is where the story fractures into two parallel, desperate realities. Javier, fighting a war on all fronts, began to see Rosa and the newborn not as a liability, but as the only uncorrupted thing left in his collapsing universe. He would stand in the doorway of the nursery, watching her feed the baby, his expression one of incomprehensible, haunted focus. The scars on her skin, now joined by the marks of childbirth, were no longer just a ledger of debt. They were a mirror reflecting the ruin he had wrought. In trying to avenge one act of destruction, he had authored a far greater one. Then came the betrayal that cut the deepest. Miguel, seeing the certain annihilation of their organization, made his own calculation. He contacted the remnants of Nueva Generación leadership. His offer, the exact location of Javier's safe house, his current security details, and the woman and child, in exchange for his own life and $1 million. He knew Javier's last shred of strategy was tied to keeping Rosa and Mateo alive as bargaining chips. Removing them would be the final killing blow. The attack on the mansion was not a stealthy incursion. It was a statement of overwhelming force designed to humiliate. 2 armored SUVs rammed through the front gates at dusk. 8 heavily armed men, fueled by vengeance and the promise of a clean kill, poured into the courtyard. Javier's remaining loyalists, caught off guard and outgunned, fought a desperate rearguard action from within the house. Javier in his study heard the explosion of the gate. He didn't reach for the rifle on his wall. Instead, he ran. He ran down the hall toward the secured nursery wing, a path he now knew by heart. He found Rosa clutching Mateo to her chest, crouched in a corner, her eyes wide with a silent scream. In that moment, the cartel leader vanished, replaced by a single driving imperative. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not cruel. The tunnel, now. Beneath the mansion, hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar, was an escape tunnel built by the previous owner, a corrupt governor. It emerged 2 blocks away in the garage of an abandoned mechanic's shop. As they stumbled through the damp, narrow darkness, the sounds of the firefight above them muffled to distant thunder, Rosa realized something. Javier was not leading them. He was herding them. He placed himself between them and the entrance they had come from, a final, physical barrier. They emerged into the cool night air of the derelict garage. A single, beat-up sedan was there, keys in the visor, as per a long-ago contingency plan. Javier shoved a thick envelope of cash and a passport into Rosa's hands. The passport was for her, with a new name and a recent photo he must have had taken without her knowledge. There was no passport for Mateo. "Go to this address in Mazatlan," he said, his voice rushed, gravelly. "A woman named Elena will meet you. She will get you on a boat. Do not look back. Do not trust anyone." Rosa stared at him, the man who had been her jailer, her unintentional protector, and now her chaotic savior. Why, was all she could manage. Javier looked at the baby in her arms, then back toward the tunnel entrance, from which the sounds of pursuit were now echoing. "Because the bill is paid," he said, and then he did something that defied all understanding. He leaned forward and placed a rough, fleeting kiss on Mateo's forehead. "The debt is mine now." He turned and ran back into the tunnel, pulling the heavy door shut behind him and sealing it with a twist of an old valve. He was going back, not to fight, but to draw the hunt away, to give them time. Rosa stood in the darkness, clutching her son, utterly alone for the first time since her nightmare began. The path to freedom was open, but the cost of that freedom was hurtling toward a violent end in the mansion above, a sacrifice she never asked for and could never comprehend. As she fumbled the key into the ignition of the old car, the night was split by a new sound, not gunfire, but the approaching wail of federal police sirens, summoned by Commander Anya, who had been monitoring the attack. 2 wars were converging on the mansion, a cartel civil war and the state's delayed justice. Javier Rojas was in the center, and the tunnel door was sealed behind him. Rosa drove into the anonymity of the night, leaving behind the only man who had ever fought for her, for reasons as twisted and scarred as her own skin. The monster had finally chosen his cage, but was it a prison of his own making, or a final, terrible act of liberation? The answer would rewrite the legend of Javier Rojas and determine if Rosa's flight was an escape or just the beginning of a longer, darker hunt. Back in the mansion, Javier Rojas was not preparing for a last stand. He was staging a surrender. But in the cartel world, surrender is not an act of peace. It's the opening move of a different kind of war. He emerged from the tunnel entrance into the wine cellar just as the first of Miguel's traitors burst in. Instead of reaching for a weapon, Javier raised his hands. "I want to talk to El Ingeniero," he said, invoking the code name of the Nueva Generacion's strategic leader. The gunmen, expecting a firefight, were stunned into hesitation. That pause was long enough for the federal police, led by Commander Anya, to breach the main floor. What followed was not a shootout, but a tense, three-way standoff in the grand foyer. Javier stood in the open, flanked by rival cartel gunmen on one side and federal tactical units on the other. In that moment, Javier performed the ultimate manipulation. He looked directly at the Nueva Generación lieutenant and said, loud enough for the police microphones to catch, "Tell El Ingeniero the deal is off. The Americans have everything." Then he turned to Commander Anya and calmly stated, "I surrender. I will give you El Ingeniero and the 12 governors on his payroll, but I do not speak here." It was a masterstroke of chaos. He had just implied to his rivals that he had already sold them out to the Americans, ensuring they would be too busy running for cover to immediately hunt Rosa. And he had given Anya the prize of a lifetime, ensuring his own survival in custody. Javier Rojas was arrested without a shot fired. The rival gunmen, fearing a massive federal operation, melted away into the night. Javier's trial was a national spectacle. He was charged with a mountain of crimes: drug trafficking, murder, money laundering. But the most shocking development was his cooperation. In a sealed courtroom, he began to talk. For 2 years, he provided detailed, verified intelligence that led to the dismantling of the Nueva Generación cartel's leadership and the arrest of over 40 corrupt officials. He did not seek a deal for himself. His only stated condition, which the court records show was honored, was that his testimony never be used to prosecute any of his own former mid- or low-level operatives, only the rival cartel and corrupt state actors. It was his final, twisted act of loyalty to his old code. He was sentenced to 40 years in a maximum security prison, a fortress known as El Altiplano. There, in a solitary wing for informants, the man who once commanded an empire now lived in a 9-by-12-foot cell. But here comes the surprising detail, one that investigators only pieced together later. Through a complex, untraceable network of lawyers and front companies, a trust fund had been established in the days before his arrest. It was funded by a portion of his hidden wealth. The sole beneficiary was a child named Mateo, born to a mother whose identity was sealed by the court. The payments were structured to begin on the child's 18th birthday, enough for university and a start in life, but not enough to draw criminal attention. Javier had built a final, silent bridge out of the hell he helped create. And what of Rosa? Her journey was one of shadows and silence. The woman named Elena in Mazatlan was not a smuggler, but a Catholic nun who ran a clandestine network for victims of domestic and cartel violence. She arranged false documents and placed Rosa and Mateo in a quiet village in central Mexico, far from the coasts and the cartel arteries. Rosa lived in constant fear for years, jumping at every strange car, terrified the past would claim her son, but it never did. The war Javier ignited had consumed the men who would have looked for her. Esteban Ruiz, disgraced and facing life in an American prison, was killed by another inmate within a year. Miguel, the betrayer, was found dead in a ditch 2 months after the mansion raid, a yellow rose in his mouth. Rosa raised Mateo alone. She worked as a seamstress. She never spoke of Culiacan, of the mansion, or of the man who saved her. The scars on her skin faded to faint silver lines, and the scars in her memory were soothed by the gentle rhythm of a normal life. When Mateo turned 18, a letter arrived from a law firm in Mexico City. It contained the details of the trust. It was the first concrete proof that the nightmare had been real. She showed it to her son and told him, for the first time, a partial truth, that a dangerous man had once helped them, and this was his remorse. Mateo, now a young man studying engineering, took the money and used it exactly as intended. He broke the cycle his mother had been born into. The debt, in Javier's broken calculus, was finally settled. The final image of this story is one of parallel solitude. In a sun-drenched village, a grandmother watches her son graduate from university, her heart full of a hard-won peace. In a dark, concrete cell, an old man stares at a wall, his empire dust, his legacy a single quiet life he made possible. He receives no letters, he expects no forgiveness. The monster who snapped at the sight of a pregnant maid's scars found his redemption not in a change of heart, but in a consistent, if brutal, application of his own warped code. He saw a wrong and made it right by the only means he understood: total, consuming violence that burned his own world to the ground in the process. The system of fear he built was ultimately used to protect the one thing he couldn't bear to see broken. And in the ashes of his kingdom, a single, fragile seed took root and grew free. This is where our documentary must end, not with a moral, but with a haunting question. When a monster does one good deed, does it make him human, or does it simply prove that even monsters have lines they will not cross? The answer depends on whether you are holding the ledger, or whether you are one of the marks written upon it. The story of Javier and Rosa is more than a cartel drama. It is a case study in the unpredictable alchemy of power and pain, and the dangerous illusion that monsters operate without a code. We expect our villains to be simple, their evil consistent. But what this saga reveals is that even the most brutal systems can produce moments of catastrophic, self-destructive conscience. Javier Rojas did not become a hero. He remained a villain until the end. But in the specific, twisted geometry of his mind, Rosa's scars represented a disorder he could not tolerate, a flaw in the universe he controlled. His response was to burn his own universe down to correct it. This forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the nature of evil. It is rarely a pure, unbroken force. It is often a series of choices, justifications, and internal rules that allow a person to compartmentalize horror. Javier's code allowed him to order murders, but forbade the abuse of the vulnerable under his direct roof. When that code was violated by an outsider, his entire identity as a ruler, however tyrannical, was challenged. His vengeance was not justice, but a form of extreme, violent housekeeping. For Rosa, the moral is even more complex. Her survival was not a triumph of good over evil, but the accidental byproduct of a war between two evils. She was a chess piece in a game she never agreed to play, and her escape was secured by the very brutality she feared. There is no clean lesson here, only a stark reminder of the collateral damage in worlds ruled by violence and the miraculous, fragile lines of escape that sometimes appear in the chaos. So what are we left with? A king in a cage, a woman living in quiet freedom, and a child who will never know the full price of his future. The ledger is closed, but the accounts are forever unbalanced. The deepest scar left by this story is not on Rosa's skin or Javier's reputation, but on our own understanding of morality in the shadows. It asks us, in the absolute darkness, is any glimmer of light a redemption or just a different kind of shadow? If these stories of impossible choices and fractured morality captivate you, if you want to delve deeper into the true crimes that blur the lines between monster and man, then your journey shouldn't end here. We uncover these complex narratives every week. Help us keep bringing you the full, unfiltered story. All you have to do is tap subscribe. Until next time.